8%. 8%. Nicole Walsh's laughter bounced off the glass walls of her corner office like bullets ricocheting in all directions. At your age, Ryan, we need hungry young talent, not expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. She couldn't finish the sentence without another wave of laughter shaking her shoulders, her Harvard MBA degree gleaming on the wall behind her like a trophy of superiority. I stood there frozen in that sterile corporate space, clutching my portfolio of 16 years' worth of achievements, watching this 37-year-old CEO with her perfectly styled blonde hair dismiss everything I'd built at this company. The leather folder in my hands contained documentation of every major project, every system I'd architected, every late night I'd sacrificed while she collected bonuses large enough to buy vacation homes in Aspen. I'm Ryan Matthews, by the way, 48 years old, director of cloud engineering at TechVault Solutions, and until that moment, the kind of guy who believed hard work eventually gets recognized. The kind of guy who stayed loyal to one company for 16 years while watching 28-year-old engineers with half my experience and twice my enthusiasm for buzzwords get promoted over me because they understood TikTok better than legacy database architectures. My wife Sarah calls me stubborn. My kids think I'm from the Stone Age because I still prefer email over Slack. But what Nicole didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that my so-called outdated approach had kept their precious cloud infrastructure running flawlessly for over a decade. While she was getting her MBA and learning about disruptive innovation, I was in server rooms at 3 a.m. making sure her billion-dollar company didn't crash. The cloud migration project I designed saved the company $2.3 million annually, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The security framework that prevented 3 major breach attempts last year alone, including that ransomware attack that would have cost us everything. The threat detection algorithms that... Nicole waved her hand dismissively, still chuckling as she leaned back in her ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her office was all glass and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay, modern art that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas and called it genius. Everything designed to intimidate, to remind you of the hierarchy. Everyone's replaceable, Ryan. Even senior engineers with decades of experience. If you think you're worth more than what we're paying, try your luck elsewhere. She stared at me with that practiced CEO smile that never reached her eyes. The same smile she wore in those quarterly all-hands meetings where she talked about us being one big family. Maybe it's time to think seriously about early retirement. Golf courses are nice this time of year. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart exactly, something deeper and more fundamental. The foundation of 16 years of believing that eventually experience would matter more than age bias, that loyalty would be rewarded, that the company I'd helped build from a 50-person startup into a 2,000-employee corporation would remember who got them there. I understand, I said quietly, collecting my portfolio. The pages trembled between my fingers as I tried to maintain whatever dignity I had left. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch, their heads buried in their monitors while they strained to hear every word of my humiliation. Listen, Ryan, Nicole's voice shifted to that artificial tone of concern that managers learn in leadership seminars. You're good at what you do, I'll give you that. But you're expensive. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $140K when we can hire 2 fresh computer science graduates for that same price. They've got energy, they understand modern frameworks, they don't need hand-holding. That's just business, nothing personal, nothing personal. As if 16 years of my life was just a business transaction. As if the nights I'd stayed until midnight debugging critical systems while she was networking at wine tastings weren't personal. As if missing my daughter's soccer games and my son's debate tournaments to keep this company running wasn't personal. That's when I knew exactly what I would do. The realization hit me like cold water, washing away 16 years of corporate conditioning and people-pleasing. If I was just a replaceable part in her business machine, then maybe it was time to see how that machine operated without me. I walked back through the open plan office to my corner workspace. Yeah, workspace, not even an office. After 16 years and a director title, I still sat in what was essentially a fancy cubicle because open office culture promotes collaboration and innovation. My desk was wedged between 2 recent graduates who called me sir and asked me to explain basic concepts like why we couldn't just rewrite our entire legacy system over a weekend. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across rows of standing desks where 25-year-olds in hoodies typed frantically on MacBooks. building tomorrow's technology on the foundation of systems I'd architected before they learned to drive. The irony wasn't lost on me. My computer screen displayed the usual flood of notifications. Slack messages from junior developers asking me to review their code. Emails from other departments begging me to fix problems they'd created. A calendar reminder for the weekly architecture meeting where I'd explain, once again, why certain approaches wouldn't work at enterprise scale. Next to my keyboard sat a photo of my family taken last Christmas. Sarah looking tired but smiling after her second round of chemotherapy. Emma, my 20-year-old daughter, home for winter break from State University, where her tuition had just increased 12% for the third year running. Jake, my 18-year-old son, already stressed about college applications and the crushing debt that awaited him. Healthcare premiums were eating 30% of my take-home pay. Sarah's cancer treatments cost us $47,000 out of pocket last year, money we borrowed against the house. Emma's education was draining our savings faster than I could replenish them. Jake was looking at engineering schools that cost $65,000 a year, and here I was, being laughed at for asking for an 8% raise after 16 years of service. Meanwhile, Nicole had just bought her third vacation home, according to the company newsletter. A ski chalet in Whistler, to go with her beach house in Malibu, and her primary residence in Pacific Heights. The same newsletter that featured a photo of her accepting an innovation award for the security framework I'd designed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook I'd kept for years. The cover was worn from handling, filled with ideas I'd jotted down during lunch breaks, weekend thoughts, solutions that came to me during my commute. Inside were my personal projects, documented meticulously with dates, development notes, and implementation details. This wasn't company property, this was my intellectual playground. The notebook contained algorithms I'd written on my home computer, security protocols I'd refined in my garage lab on weekends, machine learning models I'd trained using my own hardware. Code that TechVault had implemented without formal acquisition because I'd been too trusting, too eager to be seen as a team player, too naive to understand that corporate loyalty was a one-way street. I flipped through the pages, each entry a reminder of nights and weekends spent building the future while my family slept. Page after page of innovations that had become the backbone of TechVault's competitive advantage. The irony was bitter. Nicole saw me as outdated, but every major system keeping her company ahead of competitors had originated in this notebook. I stopped at my notes from April 2021. A series of machine learning algorithms for advanced threat detection that I'd developed during the pandemic lockdown. At the top of the page, written in my own handwriting, personal project, predictive security framework using neural networks, developed on Home System 4.15.21. Below it, detailed Git commit logs from my personal GitHub account, time-stamped and documented. What Nicole never knew, what TechVault's legal department had been too careless to investigate, was that I'd never signed over the rights to these personal innovations. The standard employment contract I'd signed 16 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources. But my most valuable creations lived in a legal gray area, personal projects developed on my equipment during my time. I pulled up my personal GitHub account on my phone, scrolling through repositories I'd created over the years. Hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped and documented. The threat detection system that saved TechVault millions, originally developed as a weekend project to secure my home network. The cloud optimization framework that earned Nicole that innovation award. I'd built the core algorithms while experimenting with reducing my personal server costs. Every major breakthrough that TechVault claimed as their intellectual property had started as my personal curiosity, my private tinkering, my unpaid passion for solving complex problems. I'd shared these innovations with the company out of loyalty, never thinking to protect my own interests, never imagining that the company I'd helped build would one day laugh at my request for fair compensation. My computer pinged with another email from HR about the quarterly company newsletter. The headline made my stomach turn. TechVault's revolutionary security platform wins industry recognition. There was Nicole's photo again, accepting another award for work that had kept me awake for months. The article quoted her talking about fostering innovation and building breakthrough technology without mentioning a single member of the engineering team. I thought about my father, who'd worked 35 years at the same manufacturing plant before they shipped his job overseas. Loyalty matters, he'd always said. Take care of the company, and the company will take care of you. He'd believed that right up until the day they handed him a pink slip and a pension that evaporated when the company declared bankruptcy. My mother had echoed the same sentiment, working as a secretary for 40 years at a law firm that replaced her with a computer system when she turned 60. They'd given her a cake and a gold watch, then escorted her out the same day. Companies don't care about loyalty anymore, she'd told me afterward. They care about quarterly profits. I should have listened to them both. Instead, I'd spent 16 years building someone else's empire, believing that hard work and dedication would eventually be rewarded. Nicole's laughter had shattered that illusion like glass. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved but never used. Scott Rodriguez, VP of Engineering at TechFlow Solutions, TechVault's biggest competitor. We'd connected on LinkedIn 2 years ago after he'd reached out following a tech conference where I'd presented on cloud security. His messages had been persistent but respectful, always professional. His last LinkedIn message, sent just 4 months ago, was still unread. Ryan, I've been following TechVault's security innovations, and I know talent when I see it. The offer still stands whenever you're ready to have a real conversation. We value experience here, not just energy. We believe gray hair means wisdom, not obsolescence. At the time, I'd been flattered but dismissive. I was loyal to TechVault. I believed in the mission. I thought Nicole, despite her youth and corporate speak, understood my value to the organization. How naive that seemed now. My fingers hovered over the call button. 16 years of corporate conditioning screamed at me to stop, to be reasonable, to not burn bridges. What if this was just a bad day? What if Nicole reconsidered? What if I could find a way to work within the system instead of abandoning it? Then I remembered her words. Maybe it's time to think seriously about early retirement. The dismissive wave of her hand, the way she talked about me like I was a piece of outdated equipment that needed to be recycled, the complete lack of respect for everything I'd built for this company. I thought about Sarah, fighting cancer while worrying about medical bills, about Emma, working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop to help pay for textbooks because her dad couldn't afford to give her a better life despite 16 years of loyal service, about Jake, who'd already started talking about community college instead of engineering school because he didn't want to burden us with debt. My family deserved better than a father who accepted being undervalued. They deserved someone who fought for what he was worth, who refused to be discarded like outdated hardware. Nicole had made it clear that loyalty meant nothing to her. Maybe it was time to show her what disloyalty looked like. I pressed call. Scott Rodriguez speaking. The voice was warm, professional, with none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I'd grown used to at TechVault. Real confidence, not the manufactured kind that came from MBA programs. This is Ryan Matthews from TechVault. I think it's time we had that conversation you mentioned. There was a pause, then genuine excitement in his voice. Ryan, I was beginning to think you'd never call. I've been following your work for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where experience is valued? I looked around the open office, at the sea of young faces bent over their screens, at the glass-walled offices where managers younger than my children made decisions about systems they didn't understand, at the corner office where Nicole was probably already planning how to replace her expensive legacy employee with hungry young talent. I'm ready, I said. When can we meet? How about dinner tonight? I know a place in Palo Alto where we can talk without interruption. Say 7 p.m.? I checked my calendar. Sarah had her support group meeting tonight. The kids would be at their after-school activities. Perfect timing to start planning my future without TechVault's involvement. I'll be there, I said. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement exactly, but purpose. The feeling that I was finally taking control instead of letting others define my worth. Nicole thought I was replaceable? We were about to find out just how wrong she was. 4 hours later, I sat across from Scott Rodriguez at Alexander's Steakhouse in Palo Alto, a place that required reservations weeks in advance. He'd made one phone call and gotten us a corner table with privacy. That told me everything I needed to know about TechFlow's influence in Silicon Valley. Scott was in his early 50s, gray at the temples but sharp-eyed, wearing a casual blazer over jeans. No corporate uniform, no power tie. He looked like someone who'd built systems with his hands before he'd learned to manage budgets. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who didn't need to prove anything. I've been following your work for years, Ryan, Scott said, studying me over his whiskey. Or rather, I've been following the sudden leaps in TechVault's security capabilities that mysteriously coincided with your project timelines on LinkedIn. That threat detection system for the Meridian Bank contract, my team tried to reverse engineer the approach for 6 months and couldn't crack it. I felt a knot in my stomach mixed with pride. Someone had actually noticed. Someone understood the technical complexity of what I'd built. How did you know that was mine? Scott smiled and took a sip of his drink. Because Nicole Walsh doesn't have the technical background to understand even the basics of machine learning algorithms, let alone architect them. I've seen her speak at conferences. She's great at buzzwords, terrible at substance. And because innovation doesn't just happen by accident, someone with deep expertise had to build those systems. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. People talk. Your reputation among actual engineers is solid gold, even if management doesn't seem to recognize it. Half the security professionals in Silicon Valley know your work, even if they've never met you. I took a sip of beer, gathering my thoughts. The restaurant buzzed with conversations about IPOs and venture capital, the soundtrack of an industry that worshipped youth and disruption. Here I was, a 48-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation stopped at 35. What exactly are you offering? I asked. Senior Engineering Director position, oversight of our entire cloud security division. Base salary $350K, full equity package that'll vest over 4 years, and a team of 8 senior engineers. Emphasis on senior. Average age on the team is 45. We believe experience creates better code than enthusiasm. My breath caught. $350K was 2.5 times my current salary. Enough to pay for Sarah's treatments without touching our retirement savings. Enough to send both kids to engineering school without drowning in debt. Enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and family needs. But more importantly, Scott continued, recognition. Your name on patents, your picture in trade publications, credit for the innovations you create. We're not interested in managers taking credit for engineering work. He paused, studying my expression. And if you brought your personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we have a proper IP acquisition process. Fair market compensation for proven technology. Something flickered in Scott's eyes. Understanding. He'd done his homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored. TechFlow wasn't just offering me a job, they were offering to properly value intellectual property that TechVault had taken for granted. I pulled out my leather notebook and placed it on the table between us. I have Git commits and development documentation proving these systems were personal projects. TechVault implemented them, but they never formally acquired the rights. Scott's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of algorithms, each entry dated and documented. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the foundation of TechVault's competitive advantage. This is comprehensive. How much of TechVault's security infrastructure is based on your personal work? About 60%, I said quietly. The core threat detection algorithms, the cloud optimization frameworks, the automated response systems, all developed on my home lab before the company implemented them. Scott closed the notebook and met my eyes. That's quite an oversight on their legal team's part. Nicole doesn't value senior functions, I said, echoing the CEO's dismissive attitude. Including legal, apparently. She's too focused on hiring fresh talent to worry about protecting existing assets. We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Scott understood the complexity of enterprise-scale systems in a way that Nicole never had. He asked intelligent questions about scalability, security trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who respected both my experience and my potential. By the time dessert arrived, we'd outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to TechFlow while staying within legal boundaries. Everything documented, everything transparent, everything Nicole should have done years ago if she'd valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Nicole's desk. The irony wasn't lost on me, printed on company letterhead, submitted through official channels, following every protocol she claimed to value. Professional to the end, even as I prepared to dismantle everything she thought she owned. She barely looked up from her MacBook, her attention split between emails and a video conference she'd muted. The multitasking that passed for leadership in her generation. 2 weeks' notice. She scanned the letter quickly. Where are you going? I'd considered lying, crafting some story about consulting or early retirement, but truth had more impact and I was done protecting her feelings. TechFlow Solutions. That got her attention. Her head snapped up from the screen, eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since the morning's humiliation. Our biggest competitor. That's unfortunate timing. We're in final negotiations with Meridian Bank to expand our security contract. I know. I said simply. I built the threat detection model that won us that contract. Nicole's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling concern, maybe even fear. For the first time, I saw her calculating what my departure might actually cost the company. We should discuss retention options immediately. Perhaps that raise you mentioned, maybe 15%, plus a promotion to VP level. The offer was everything I'd wanted that morning, more than I'd dared to ask for. If she'd shown this flexibility 8 hours earlier, none of this would have happened. But some doors, once closed, can't be reopened with money alone. The offer from TechFlow is $350K plus equity, I said. But more importantly, they value experience over age bias. She laughed, but it sounded hollow now. Nothing like the confident dismissal from her office. They're overpaying by at least 100%. You'll be disappointed when they realize a 48-year-old engineer can't adapt to their development pace. I smiled, feeling that strange new confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. We'll see who's disappointed. My last 2 weeks at TechVault were surreal. Suddenly, people who'd barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about projects, understand systems they'd ignored. Middle management scrambled to document processes they'd never bothered to learn, realizing too late that institutional knowledge walked out the door with the people who created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness, trained my replacement, a 26-year-old named Josh who seemed both eager and terrified, and backed up all my personal project documentation. I also made careful copies of every email where I'd shared innovations with the company, creating an evidence trail of TechVault's failure to properly acquire what they'd freely used. I walked out of TechVault's glass headquarters for the last time at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in March. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my new corner office at TechFlow, explaining to my team of 8 senior engineers how we were going to revolutionize cloud security. Real engineers with real experience. The oldest was 52, the youngest was 38. People who understood that wisdom and energy weren't mutually exclusive. 6 weeks later, the first implementation of my security framework went live at TechFlow. The same algorithms Nicole had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now detecting threats 72 hours before they materialized. Processing speeds increased 35%. False positives dropped by 60%. Our sales team had data proving we could outperform TechVault's best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I'd trained in my garage were predicting attack patterns with 94% accuracy. The threat detection system that had saved TechVault millions was now saving TechFlow's clients even more, with my name properly credited on every patent filing. For the first time in 16 years, my innovations belonged to me legally and professionally. The morning Meridian Bank announced they were terminating their contract with TechVault and switching to TechFlow. My phone started ringing. First call was from a trade publication wanting to interview the architect behind TechFlow's security breakthrough. Second call was from a venture capital firm interested in licensing our threat detection technology. Third call was from Nicole. I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times over 2 days before leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Ryan, this is Nicole. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. TechVault is prepared to offer a substantial compensation package for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow. Too little, too late, motivated by panic rather than recognition. I didn't return the call. 4 days later, Nicole was waiting beside my car in the TechFlow parking garage. She looked different, tired, stressed, none of the polished confidence from that morning when she'd laughed at my raise request. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it. This is inappropriate, I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. You've put 180 jobs at risk, she said, her voice urgent and desperate. TechVault is facing an existential crisis because of the intellectual property you took. I didn't take anything that belonged to TechVault, I replied calmly. I took my personal intellectual property that TechVault used without proper acquisition. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details. Nicole stepped closer, desperation evident in her bloodshot eyes. She'd probably been working 18-hour days trying to contain the damage. Name your price. Whatever TechFlow is paying, we'll double it, triple it. We'll make you CTO, give you equity, whatever you want. I thought about those 16 years sitting in that cubicle while she collected bonuses for my work, about the morning she'd dismissed me like obsolete hardware, about my family's medical bills and my children's educational dreams that her 8% refusal had jeopardized. You once told me everyone's replaceable, I said quietly. Even senior engineers. I'm just following your business philosophy. The following quarter, TechVault's stock fell 47%. They laid off 180 employees in 2 waves, targeting senior staff with the highest salaries first. The tech media described it as a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and mysterious deterioration of their award-winning security systems. Industry analysts wrote case studies about the dangers of undervaluing experienced talent in competitive markets. Nicole resigned under pressure from the board after their stock hit a 3-year low. Her replacement was a 55-year-old former IBM executive who immediately began trying to poach senior engineers from competitors. Too late. The damage to TechVault's reputation in the engineering community was irreversible. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. TechVault sued me for theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their case collapsed spectacularly when my documentation proved conclusively that I had developed the core algorithms as personal projects. The judge not only dismissed their claims but awarded me legal fees, noting that TechVault had failed to secure proper ownership of innovations they'd implemented. But victory felt more complex than I'd expected. 3 months after the lawsuit ended, Amanda Wilson, TechVault's former head of customer service, visited my office. She'd been with the company for 12 years before the layoffs, someone I'd shared coffee with and complained about management decisions alongside. 180 people lost their jobs, Ryan, she said, sitting across from my desk. People with families, mortgages, kids in college. Was your revenge worth destroying their livelihoods? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. I'd focused so intently on Nicole's arrogance that I'd underestimated the collateral damage. You're right to be angry, I said. That's why TechFlow has hired 73 former TechVault employees in the last 4 months, including everyone from your customer service team who wanted to join us. Amanda's expression softened slightly. And the others? The ones who can't relocate, who are too specialized, who are close to retirement? That conversation led to the creation of Experience Matters, TechFlow's formal initiative targeting displaced senior professionals industry-wide. We partnered with 3 retraining organizations to offer skills updates for engineers over 45. We created consulting opportunities for near-retirement professionals who wanted flexible arrangements. We became the first major tech company to explicitly reject age bias in hiring. The program became a model for Silicon Valley. Other companies began questioning their own youth-obsessed hiring practices. Within a year, applications to our open positions increased 400%, with experienced professionals specifically seeking out companies that valued their expertise over their energy levels. 8 months after leaving TechVault, I received the IEEE Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to cloud security architecture. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience full of gray-haired engineers and young developers working together, I thought about Nicole's comment regarding early retirement. She'd been wrong about everything. We weren't expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. We were battle-tested professionals who understood the difference between moving fast and building systems that actually work long-term. When you combine decades of hard-won experience with the motivation to prove doubters wrong, you create something pretty unstoppable. A year later, I still think about that morning in Nicole's office, not with anger anymore, but with something approaching gratitude. Her laughter taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Your loyalty means nothing if you don't value yourself first. The gray hair she saw as a liability turned out to be my competitive advantage. Last month, TechVault made headlines again, declaring bankruptcy and selling their assets to a private equity firm. The company I'd helped build from 50 employees to 2,000 was gone, dismantled by leadership that confused energy with competence, disruption with innovation. If you're reading this and you're over 45, dealing with managers who think your experience is expensive rather than valuable, remember something. Your knowledge isn't just worth defending, it's worth fighting for. Document your work, understand your legal rights, and never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to become invisible. Age isn't a weakness in tech, it's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. And when experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, industries change. The algorithms are still running. My name is on the patents. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a CEO is learning not to laugh at senior engineers asking for their worth.